We begin with the debate that you can now see what's happening in America. We can clearly report that we are at the start of the Democrats' 2020 race. Think about it like this. Before this week, most Americans had not heard from any of these Democratic candidates for any extended amount of time. And polls showed that even most self-identified Democrats said they just weren't watching this race yet. Well, that just changed. 20 Democrats marching on these stages this week. And there were some, you may have heard, who criticized the DNC for letting these debates get sort of too large, supposedly. Well, voters didn't seem to mind, because tonight we just got these figures and learned this was the most watched Democratic debate ever. More than 18 million people watching, another 9 million streaming it. And they saw a party that's clearly moving left on immigration and health care. And they saw new faces like Pete Buttigieg, who was addressing a police shooting in his hometown during the debate. And they also saw new approaches with Marianne Williamson speaking the language of spirituality and love and how she thinks Dems should run against Trump. And they saw new alternatives like Senator Warren blending a kind of a wonkish pragmatism with fiery economic liberalism. And then people also saw a civil rights clash that could echo long past last night. Joe Biden found himself today defending his record after that Kamala Harris attack. He was speaking at an event with Jesse Jackson.
I heard and I listened to and I respect Senator Harris. But, you know, we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights. I fought my heart out to ensure that civil rights and voting rights, equal rights are enforced everywhere. It's a constitutional question to protect the civil rights of every single American. And that's always been my position.
That is what Joe Biden looks like on defense. Here is what Kamala Harris looks like setting the tone today. She was not explaining herself. She was doubling down on that debate moment, sharing this picture captioned simply, "That little girl was me," teeing off this moment that many say defined this widely watched debate.
We're going to get to you. Hang on. We're going to get to
stage. I would like to speak on the issue of race. And I will say also that in this campaign, we've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
It was quite a moment. So what was Senator Harris doing? Well, first, she was defining her personal story as the embodiment of America's progress on civil rights. That's a delicate but ultimately accurate political project for her. It's a style perfected by the last Democrat to occupy the Oval Office, Barack Obama. Second, she increased the stakes of Biden's recent gaffe, making it about more than just maybe poorly chosen words, linking his apparent nostalgia for the Democratic caucus's yesteryears to a tangible confrontation over civil rights remedies. Harris arguing it's one thing to talk about civil rights, another to act on the challenges of integration, education, and busing. And third, let's be clear, Harris did what many deaf politicians do. She simplified and defined Biden into a corner, even at the cost of some policy nuance. The civil rights and legal challenges with busing are not binary. Skepticism towards certain busing programs isn't the same as skepticism towards all integration. That's why civil rights leaders like former NAACP leader Derek Bell, who was, by the way, the first tenured black professor at Harvard Law, ultimately concluded that mandatory desegregation and busing did not automatically benefit civil rights, writing that they can be advantageous, irrelevant, or even disadvantageous. That was in 1976. And that debate was roiling long before the Supreme Court narrowed how public schools are even legally allowed to use race to integrate in a 2007 decision, which changes what you can do today, and that didn't come up yet last night. Now, both Harris and Biden know all of that. They know everything I just said because they are skilled and experienced attorneys as well as politicians. And I think they know their positions may not be as far apart as they appeared on the stage last night. But they also appear to both recognize that Harris has the upper hand right now, because with or without that nuance, Harris is arguing that she is going after Joe Biden for something she views as very real, and that she stitched together several of his vulnerabilities, not only his record or his age or the age of his ideas, but her argument that he has an apparent nostalgia for good old days that many in today's Democratic Party would much rather leave behind. Let's get right to the big conversation. I'm joined by Brittany Cooper, professor at Rutgers, political commentator and activist Sally Kohn, and Basil Smikle, the former director of the New York Democratic Party and a Democratic strategist. Thanks to all of you for being here. Your view of what happened and whether that moment will last.
It absolutely will last. Joe Biden deserved to be challenged. There are two issues here. One is the issue of how he takes care of and will take care of black voters and issues around race. We can get into the granular debates about the failures of integration, and there have been many, and whether busing was the most proper remedy for dealing with generations of African-American children pushed out of public schools. I think that's a reasonable debate, and I think that we don't have to take Kamala Harris's endorsement of busing in her own life as the beacon of where we should go, because that actually isn't the point. What she was saying was, your policies have real-world impacts on actual people, and because if you had won your debate, then I might not be standing on this stage. And that's something that white folks are going to have to reckon with, the way in which they have been anodyne and that they have often been cowards on issues of civil rights has real-world impacts about who gets to lead the country today. What we needed Biden to do, if he wants to really be in this fight, is to say, I categorically condemn people who were anti-integration. I categorically condemn them and condemn the ways that they limited life chances for black students, and also want to say that this was a policy debate, not actually a debate about what kind of life chances I want you to have. He is terrible about getting the moral argument right, and that makes him feel equivocal to the American voter in a way that it makes him not trustworthy.
Yeah, listen, it was a powerful moment, masterfully executed. You know, there are a lot of folks that, sort of look at Biden and say, well, he wasn't prepared and so on. But the truth is that Kamala Harris was prepared. This was a specific strategic decision to go after him in this way. It was done very, very well. And what I've said is that, look, she has essentially taken his message of, I can work with anyone, because that's essentially what he's saying, and twisting it. She took the years of experience that he's had, she took all of the stature that he's had within the party, embraced it, and then in the same breath used it against him. That was incredible.
Did she need busing to do that, and how accurate was she, in your view, on the civil rights content of the complex busing debate?
Quite frankly, she could have used a lot of things. He has gone subsequent since then and talked about his record.
She could have, but I'm asking you about the busing part.
Well, look, I absolutely agree with what was said. I think there are a lot of people that cut busing very differently, and thank you for using Derek Bell, because he's actually an intellectual hero of mine.
Derek Bell is widely known as a G. A law school G.
He was my con law professor.
Well, there you go.
I mean, and he left Harvard because they wouldn't continue.
That's exactly right.
African Americans.
So I think.
Well, now since we're getting into it, Derek Bell is someone who is unassailable on this. He fought for women of color to get tenure at Harvard, and when they wouldn't do it, gave up his Harvard tenure.
Can we clarify that Biden, on the time period we're talking about in his record, Biden said that desegregation is not the same thing as integration, and he spoke out against integration. And that was not one gaffe, that was not one statement, that was in op-eds, that was in speeches. So this really isn't about busing, this is about busing as a remedy for integration.
Well, hold on. I'm going to moderate a little bit. To that point, Senator Harris, though, made it about busing and explicitly his position on busing. There's many things we can debate and talk about.
Yeah, but it was a symbol of his position on integration and on civil rights, and whether we can trust that he's going to govern in a way that benefits all Americans. And I actually think Derek Bell would have a problem with the idea that we should give him points, we should give Biden points because of the debates and disagreements about busing.
Let me be clear, then I'll hand the mic.
Bell would absolutely be on the side of black women having access to educational opportunities.
Let me be clear, and then I'll hand the mic back to you. I am not saying or reporting that Derek Bell gives Biden any points.
Sure.
Indeed, the late Derek Bell isn't here to give anyone any points.
Sure.
But I am pointing out that there was nuance at the time in the 70s, even within CORE and NAACP and impact litigation, separate from whether this was, oh my God, we should do court-ordered busing in every city. So having said that, it still remains the question you raised, which is where does Biden stand for today's Democratic Party?
Well, and also that Biden is often on the wrong side of history on major issues. He was on the wrong side of history with Anita Hill. He was on the wrong side of history with the crime bill. He was on the wrong side of history with the Iraq war. And the challenge is that what people are asking him to do is say, as a career politician, will you reckon with your record and be willing to say there are places where I screwed up? And in this moment, I would think in a more progressive and thoughtful way about how we educate African American children. He could say that, and he keeps leaving opportunities on the table and making it about his ego.
This is the thing about having the record that he does. When you have this long resume, you have to explain it to people that don't know you. And when you're explaining, you're losing. So that's why it always seems like he's just kind of back on his heels over and over and over again. At the end of the day, I actually don't know whether or not he loses African American support as a result of this in and of itself. Sure. But over time, all of these little, not so little, but all of these gaffes, all of these moments where he could turn the message around and say, you know what, this was where I was, but this is where I am because this is where we are today as America. He hasn't seemed to be able to make that pivot. And over time, that's the challenge that his campaign is going to have to address. Otherwise, he's going to lose all of this support.
Well, I think you both put it so well, and the professor talks about the time machine part, right?
Yeah.
That if it's one incident, there may be nuance, but when you add them together over the decades,
yes,
he would appear to have a bigger problem, at least in today's Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
Let me play a little bit of Joe Biden last night, because the calendar that he is interested in is post-2008. He is not interested in the crime bill, the super predators. Take a look.
Yes.
Characterized my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true, number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that. I was a public defender. I didn't become a prosecutor.
Force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. My community is in anguish right now because of an officer involved.
The quickest, fastest way to do it is build on Obamacare, to build on what we did during the Obama-Biden administration. I think you're so underestimating what Barack Obama did. President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job.
We went through a couple of moments from last night, but the key one being name-checking Obama.
Yeah, absolutely. He is trying to run as the addendum to Obama. The challenge for all of that is that we have moved past the Obama years. Trump has reset the territory here. I think that the real challenge for Biden is that he wasn't expecting to have to contend with a left-leaning Democratic Party, and he's hoping that Americans will play the safe bet, and he is trying to argue that he's the safe bet. And this is why he deserves to be pushed. We want a president that is actually going to reinvigorate a progressive agenda. And right now, nothing about Biden is looking particularly progressive other than the fact that he was Obama's vice president.
You know, I think that moment between Kamala Harris and Biden was important for this election because it ruptured this notion of electability, right? Going into this, the reason, if you talk to people why they like Biden, it's not necessarily his policies, not necessarily his baggage, not even his personality, it's we think he can win. Well, last night, she sure seemed like the one who would be unruffled by a Trump. She was collected and thoughtful and prosecutorial and powerful, and he was sure ruffled. He got defensive. He was fumbling for his words in that moment, which he should have been prepared for. So I think in the election, it really ruptures that and puts electability on the table. Now, the other reason that conversation was important is for the country. Right. And I think that what we want to see now, look, don't get me wrong, Trump's base, they are fine with a guy who says these horrific things and does these horrific things and never apologizes. Right. But thank God, Democrats, and I think the majority of Americans, want to see people who grow and learn and change. So it's not that you can't be forgiven for the crime bill or for the racist, horrific, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, whatever you got in your past, but learn and grow and change, right? Transform. Say, this is how I've learned, this is how I've become better, because we grow and change and improve as a people and hopefully as a country. And we're not seeing that from Biden. And I think that's more consequential than this election. That's a bad role model for where we need to be going as a nation.
If we could zoom out a little bit as well, and just go to Mayor Pete for a second. You know, when he was asked about the representation of his police department, he has a 26% African-American city and a 6% African-American police department, and he said, well, I couldn't get it done in terms of increasing that. You know, and I left that in thinking to myself, well, did you try?
Right.
Because that is a massive disparity there. And I think the overall, the point that I would make to sort of bring that together with Biden here is that you cannot come to this debate stage in 2019 and be race neutral and get away with a lot of the rhetoric that you used before. I'm good, I tried, but I just couldn't get it done. It just does, the stakes are too high.
Well, I will say, in fairness, if you are a small town mayor and you're not getting the job done in your city, obviously sometimes you just have to go off and run for president. I mean, that's
that's what you do.
That is the fundamental assumption of white male mediocrity.
That's right.
Is that when I fail, I should fail up.
And while we're on this topic of privileged white folks,
Beto, sorry.
right, exactly right.
It's a hot panel.
Because I would tell you all of the conversation about him, and I said, can he ever live up to the expectation of him having run the Senate race and then being launched into this presidential race? And I kept saying, well, why not Andrew Gillum? Why not Stacey Abrams? And they look rather prescient right now by staying out, because I actually think he did a lot of damage to himself. And you get back to this question of maybe he should have actually run for Senate instead of running for president this year. So it also again reinforces this point that we can't just accept you and say you're going to get all this support. You speak a certain way and you carry yourself a certain way, so my God, we have to support you. It doesn't work that way.
Right, and part of what you're talking about is where the Democratic electorate is. Is it feeling real chill and nice and laid back, or is it feeling like there's work to be done and the right people have to be picked and there's going to be a competitive primary? Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.